Well, welcome again, everyone. I just want to thank you for choosing us to spend your evening with. I'm really excited to share this virtual story hour with all of you. My name is Tracy Noriega. I am the past president of FAEAC, the Filipino American Educators Association in California. Tonight, we have with us Dr. Robin Rodriguez, who is our current president. And Freedom Siam, who is going to be he's currently our vice president. And I know that we're going to go ahead and get started with our agenda. But if you have not had a chance to, feel free to place your name in the chat with the land you're occupying, the first book you read by a Filipino American author, and what your experience was reading that book. Because tonight it's going to be super exciting. We have 4 authors that are going to share their journeys with us. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Freedom, who will let us know what the agenda is going to look like tonight and start to introduce our authors. Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. And thank you, everybody, again, for being with us this evening. You could be anywhere, and you are with us. So really appreciate it, especially to our presenters or our authors today. Tonight we have Robin, Gayle, Justine, and Conrad, and we will go in that order. And I will first introduce Robin Aquilizan, who is a 23-year-old Filipino American. She grew up in Union City, where she was a youth community organizer and discovered her passion for social justice, Filipino history, and ethnic studies. She graduated from San Francisco State in 2020. For 10 years, her family has been operating a business called Bayani Art. And Bayani Art works with artists globally to teach people Filipino history through art and apparel. In the last year, the business has expanded beyond apparel by creating children's books. Robin, along with her family, has created 3 books on Filipino heroes: Lapu Lapu, Gabriela Salong, and Andres Bonifacio. I've had the pleasure to serve Robin as a PEP teacher at Balboa High School in the past. Thank you for being with us, Robin. The mic is yours.
Thank you so much, Free, for that introduction. Before I get started, I just want to thank you all for being here today. It really is such a big honor to be able to share space with a bunch of other amazing Filipino authors. And so with that, again, my name is Robin Katana Aquilizan. I'm 23 years old. Again, I'm from Union City. And besides Bayani Art, I also work at Filipino Advocates for Justice as their youth program specialist. So that's a little bit about me, but just a little bit about Bayani Art. So again, it's been around for more than 10 years now, and it was created by my dad, and it's my family business. And for 10 years, we've created art and apparel inspired by the stories of our ancestors. And ever since I was a little girl, I remember my dad and my cousin would always have talks and dreams and goals of creating a book ever since I was younger, ever since we started Bayani Art. And so it wasn't until 2020, the year that I was getting ready to graduate, the year that I was coordinating for Pinoy Pinay Educational Partnerships, where we finally decided that after 10 years, I think we're ready to create this book together. And that was a conversation that I had with my dad and my cousin AJ. And the initial idea was to do a 4-part children's book series. Yeah. And so Bayani Art, ever since the beginning, we've always collaborated. Collaboration is a big part of the work, and it's very important to us. And so we've worked with other artists, other scholars, historians, organizations, even sports teams. We've worked with the Warriors, which is super exciting, and other businesses. We really work together to create art for the community and with the community. And so this book process was nothing different. It was a collaborative process from the beginning and to the end. And so just to go a little bit more into what the writing process was like. Oh, and also before I get into that, let me introduce my 3 books so far. So Gabriela Silong, Lapu Lapu, and Andres Bonifacio is the new one for my newest book. And so I co-wrote all of these with my cousin. So me and my cousin Erin, we sat down together and wrote everything out. And then after we had like the base story, we storyboarded with my uncle Ponzi, who's actually in Australia. So we collaborate with like artists globally. So we storyboarded with my dad and my uncle Ponzi. And then from there, after we had a very solid working first draft, I ended up going to 3 educators that I really trust, and I'm not sure if they're in the Zoom room today. Just 3 educators I trust that I knew whose feedback I would really value and meant a lot to me and would give really critical feedback. That's Ivan Santos, my Ata Allison Tintiaco Cubales, and my Auntie Alma Buenavista. And they're all educators here in the Bay Area. And once we had all of that feedback collected, we went to our editor, Mia. And then after we went to our editor, Mia, we had to do a glossary. And so I went to my cousins and also my housemates, honestly, to help me with that. And I just want to emphasize that I wouldn't be able to create this book whatsoever if it wasn't for my community. That everybody that I listed that I'm going to be talking about today, this wouldn't be possible without them. And I don't even see this as my own book. I see this as like something I created alongside my community. And so yeah, that's a little bit about the writing process. I think another thing I want to highlight is when I was working on my acknowledgements and the intro, and I'll also be able to give a brief reading right after this, as I really reflected on like how I got here and who this book was for. And I had to like acknowledge that I am a product of ethnic studies 100% through and through. Like I remembered and I really reflected on the first ethnic studies class that I had, which was Filipino heritage studies at James Logan High School with Ivan Santos. And I don't know if he's in the room today, but I remember how much my life transformed in this classroom when I first learned about my history. I remember in that class was the first time, and this kind of goes into Tracy's checking question. It was the first time I picked up a book, and it was E.J.R. David's Brown Skin, White Minds. And I remember feeling so seen for the first time in my whole life. And also learning about Larry Itliong Veracruz, and then seeing me and my peers like come together and change a whole name to Itliong Veracruz Middle School. And so all of these experiences in ethnic studies really helped me realize like how transformative, how monumental it is when you get to grow up learning your history, that it's life-changing, that it's transformative. Something I also kind of mentioned a little bit is Pinoy Pinay educational partnerships. And so when I was spending my time in undergrad at SF State, I was an educator and a coordinator for PEP, and I worked alongside incredible teachers, students, coordinators. I learned a lot of lessons from my mentors, Ata Allison, Manong Rod, and Manang Arlene. And I really learned like ways we can make history engaging and relevant for youth, because I love history, but I get that it can be kind of boring for some folks. So really thinking about ways we can make history from like 300, 200, 100 years ago relevant and engaging to our young folks today. And one more shout out that I have to give is actually for Gayle and Manang Dawn. I took a lot of inspiration from Journey for Justice, a lot of inspiration. I remember the same feelings I felt reading that book. And also I wanted to like the same messaging of like how to overcome struggle as a community. I wanted that to be encompassed in my book. And so have to shout out Gayle and Manang Dawn. And also if folks have heard of the ethnic studies story plot, which was introduced to me from the Journey for Justice curriculum, that was also created by amazing educators like Ata Allison and Eileen Poctagon, a lot of other amazing folks. Really made me figure out like how I wanted to frame the story. So what do these stories tell us about ourselves, and how to talk about the struggle, but also highlight like how our communities overcame it together. And then, yeah, that's kind of like how I came about creating the book. And because like I was so influenced by ethnic studies, I thought a lot about like not everyone has access to ethnic studies. And so I want them to be able to learn about themselves, their families, communities, and in these books. And that it doesn't have to wait until they get to college to learn about themselves, that they get to start this conversation very early on with their families. And so these 3 books have been out for a couple years. This was the newest one. These 2 have been out for like a year now. And I absolutely love seeing the brown babies reading it with their families. I love seeing Filipino educators share it with their classrooms. And with that, I'm gonna introduce my newest book on Andres Bonifacio. I'm gonna actually share my screen so that y'all can see the visuals alongside of it. And my next book will be on Tandang Sora. She's mentioned in this book. And just like as I'm reading this book out, there's actually some Easter eggs in the book that I would love for y'all to look out for. So if you see any of my mentors that I named out, if you know Ivan Santos, of Chris Cara, of Amado Kaya, they're actually all Easter eggs in this book. So love for y'all to take a look or try to find them in the book if you can. But with that, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and get started. Can everyone see this? Okay, sounds good. So for my family, for my students, for my mentors, for my community, for my ancestors, you all read everything. Robin Kitana Aquilizan, in honor of Amado Kaya Kanam Rodriguez, Andres Bonifacio. And also, if over time, feel free to just pause me. In the year 1863, a boy named Andres Bonifacio was born in the town of Tondo. Little did young Bonifacio know that one day he would become a symbol of hope for his people. Bonifacio was a great kuya. He was very compassionate, loving, and always looked after his siblings. At the age of 14, his parents suddenly passed, leaving him responsible for his younger siblings. He started a small business selling canes to provide for his family. He saw how the invaders took advantage of the people and their land. The invaders forced the people to pay taxes. If they could not pay, they would end up losing their homes. Despite all the hardships, Bonifacio took care of not only his family, but also his whole community. He had a passion for reading and was inspired by Dr. Jose Rizal and his book Noli Me Tangere. Bonifacio and Rizal met in 1892 during the formation of La Liga Filipina, whose goal was to help unite the islands and protect the sacred lands through reform. 3 days later, Rizal was arrested and he was exiled to Dapitan. Bonifacio knew it was his duty to continue the fight. Bonifacio, along other La Liga Filipina members, formed the Katipunan. Together, they wanted to continue the struggle for liberation. Bonifacio was nicknamed May Pag-asa, meaning there is hope. Lead, unite. In 1895, Bonifacio was voted to be the leader of the Katipunan. His community admired him for his leadership and his love for the people and sacred lands. They called him Supremo. Bonifacio married a woman named Gregoria de Jesus. She, along with other Filipinas, played a big role in organizing the movement and was given the nickname La Cambini. Eventually, the invaders found out about the Katipunan's plans to fight for their freedom and demanded for all of them to be arrested. After hearing of the arrest of the Katipuneros, Bonifacio met with Melchora Aquino, who was also known as Tandang Sora, the mother of the Katipunan. They discussed how to bring the movement forward. He gathered 1,000 Katipuneros at the house of Tandang Sora and ordered everyone to rip their cedulas. Cedulas represented the invaders' power over the people. This was a symbolic act against colonial rule, and this is known as the Cry of the Katipunan of 1896. After 300 years of colonization, the people came together to resist. Supremo commanded the Panday to prepare weapons for battle. Bonifacio led the Katipunan to what is now known as the Battle of San Juan of 1896. And this is one of my favorite art pieces in the whole book. The Katipunan managed to take the invaders' weapons and supplies. As they sustained their resistance in neighboring towns, the invaders grew concerned. Soon after the news came out of Rizal's death, the community became outraged, fueling the flames of the revolution. Supremo became the symbol of hope and inspired the movement through the people's common struggle, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. And Bonifacio's legacy continues to empower people today. He uplifts others to lead and unite their communities. Supremo Andres Bonifacio. And with that, that's the end of the book. There's a glossary at the end, and then you can see the acknowledgements for me and also other folks who helped with this project. And yeah, that's my third book. And I think that's about everything. You can purchase these on our website at bioniart.com. And again, there's 3 different ones, and I'm working on my 4th one on Tandang Sora because we need more books on Panay's. And with that, I'll pass it back to Free or hand it off Free. I'll hand it off.
Robin, thank you so much. I shared earlier that the first book that I read from a Filipino American author was America's in the Heart. That was back in 1994, 95. I was a senior in high school. You could count the number of books by Filipino Americans maybe on 2 hands. And so when I saw that you came out with your first 2 books, was that last year? I was so moved, so inspired, and so grateful. And so we have a generation of folks after you who are going to be grateful and for the seeds that you're planting in terms of our quest for justice and equality and equity. You're contributing to that. So thank you. Appreciate it. And we now have someone who inspired Robin as well and inspired many of us. I've seen Gayle, the first time I've seen Gayle, we were just talking about this recently, was at Bindlestiff Studios back in 2000 or maybe 2001 as a violinist, is that correct? For Bobby Bandoria. But Gayle Romasanta is a publisher, writer, and artist whose work focuses on the Filipino American experience. She received a BA in creative writing from San Francisco State University and an MFA, writing from California College of the Arts. Her written work has been featured in the New York Times, Smithsonian Magazine, KQED's The Forum, and Smithsonian Folklife and Cultural Heritage Magazine. She has published in books online and magazines, and in her most recent work, Journey for Justice, The Life of Larry Itliong, co-written with the late and great Dr. Don Mabalan, has taken her on a national book tour celebrating Itliong and his contributions to the farm labor movement. And Gayle is also our newest, can I say it? Mm-hmm. Our newest executive director for the Filipino American Development Fund. If you did not know, the FADF is so critical in supporting so many of our initiatives and organizations here in the Bay Area. And we're grateful to have you, Gayle. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Free. It's so good to be here. And yes, I'm now the new executive director of the Filipino American Development Foundation. This is the first time I've said that sentence outside of meetings. So I'm really proud of that. And FADF has, for over 20 years, it's nurtured and been there as a backbone for the community, a touchstone for many of our well-known and loved organizations such as PEP, the Pinay Pinoy Educational Partnerships, for Soma Pilipinas, which is a program of FADF, and for a multitude of other organizations that it was able to nurture over 20 years. So I'm really proud that I'm and honored that I'm able to be part of FADF now, and hopefully into the future, and see what FADF can continue to sustain and continue to grow as a touchstone for Filipino community, and as a true asset and asset holder for many of our nonprofit organizations. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of art and how someone like me, who always wanted to be an artist, got now to FADF and into publishing books. And so I'd always known that I wanted to be a writer and an artist. I've been doing it. I'm doing the same things that I was doing in high school as I am now, right? So I was organizing. My parents were very political. I was organizing, writing and being part of, newspaper and writing. And I continue to do that throughout college. And I've always been interested in how art and words actually culture shift, right? You can really shift cultures with books. A long time ago, someone told me, because I was part of Bindlestiff and I was doing so much theater work, and I was part of Bobby Bandurria, and I was a violinist also. And then currently right now, which is really cool, I'm an artist in residence at Brava Theater in San Francisco, and I live in Stockton. So I'm very much a Stockton person too. But a lot of my training was done in San Francisco. And so I've always been interested in that. And so I went to law school, and I knew immediately I was touring with my violin and with the band while I was in law school, because I thought that was what a good Filipino Pinay was supposed to do, was to understand the language of power, right? I knew that art was very important to me, but understanding power and how to shift power dynamics within our community was important to me too. But when I started imagining theater and music coming through while I was, when I was in class, I knew then that I had to go to art school. So I ended up getting a scholarship to get a Master of Fine Arts in 2000 in San Francisco, which is at California College of the Arts. And I was actually surprised that I had gotten a scholarship. It never even occurred to me that I was any good. I just thought I was doing it because it was a joy and it was a love and it was a passion. But I didn't know anybody who did it really as a living. I never knew anybody who actually had an MFA except one woman I knew, a Pinay. I didn't know any other Pinay that had gotten an MFA at that time, and was specific to writing, right? I didn't know anybody who'd done that. I think MFA programs started getting popular after I went in, and that started to grow, but I didn't really know folks who did it and made it as a living. And so I went and did that, and it changed my world. It changed my perspective when I actually accepted the role of culture shifting via art, right? Instead of thinking, oh, I need to become a lawyer, or things that in our community are things that you would normally do, right? A lot of parents or a lot of community members will say, why don't you be a doctor? Why don't you do STEM? Why don't you do X, Y, and Z? And so this was really kind of a road that wasn't really anyone thought to go on in my family. And it wasn't one that I saw at all in my community that people did professionally. And so when I see Robin talking about, the openness of which that she takes on art and takes on words, that is such a wonder, because that wasn't happening, right? And so, with my whole world's coming together with art and organizing. And for those of you, I know that I see a Kappa there, who was part of Kappa Psi Epsilon at SF State. I actually founded Kappa Psi Epsilon at Long Beach State when I was 19, many, many years ago. And so to be able to continue that, to piggyback, right? You piggyback organizing, you piggyback art, you piggyback the history and learning how our ancestors and how the folks before us organized and pushed whatever they needed to fight for the communities and to fight for their rights. And so that has really been a lifelong lesson for me. How do you do that? And how do you do that now? For me, I see a lot, maybe some parents out here, how do you do it as an adult with children? And how do you push forward doing that? And so that's been in navigation. And that's why Journey for Justice was born, because I wanted to continue on this organizing with my kids. And I wanted them to learn about their history, specifically because they're in Stockton, we live in Stockton. I could not find a book, period, about Larry Itliong, who was so important and centered to the United Farm Workers and so important in the farm labor movement in California, right? So Larry has been organizing, and Filipino Americans have been organizing since the 1920s to now, and yet there was nothing written. I'd heard about Cesar Chavez. My kids only knew about Cesar Chavez. And so we actually had to make the book. I called up Dawn, Dr. Dawn Mabalon, and she was, the researcher about Larry and a historian. There's only a few Filipino American historians, especially at that time, and probably even now, you can count them on your hand, who have PhDs in specifically Filipino American history. And Dawn was one of them. And so it was such a great loss when we lost her in 2018. But she wrote we came together, she said yes. and her research here and what she was writing and what I was assisting her on and helping edit. And what we tried to marry really was an exciting story for young people and for our community, but also a historically accurate picture of our community where we actually held our power, our own power. No one gave it to us. We found it within ourselves, and it's been here with us historically for so long. And so this is what the culmination of when we let our children and when we let our community run with the arts and run with organizing, we start creating, right? And we start creating amazing things. And I think Justine here also was probably one of the first, if not the first, crowdfunded book project, Filipino book project that I'd ever seen. So much innovation and so much props to Justine for starting that for so many of us, and for us to be able to see like, oh my gosh, there's Zip and I doing that. And so it is a community inspiration. And so when folks are able to run with how they want to culture shift and do that within artistic spaces, we also get to organize, and we also get to our needs met as a community. So I will read a little bit about Journey for Justice, whatever time I have left. I'm not reading, actually, my daughter is reading. We created this video so that teachers and communities would not have to pay for the book. If you did not have access, if you do not have money, you still have a resource online on YouTube that is free. And so for those teachers, for anybody who wants to show this, you can. My daughter read it, she put it together. She also edited it because I do not know how to do any of those things. So what you see here is her own camera framing and everything. And at the time she was 15. So I don't know, Tracy, if I have a lot of time left, but maybe if you want to show like 3 minutes or 4 minutes, you also get a summary of Larry, if for those of you who don't know him.
Hello, my name is Ruby, and I'm going to be reading excerpts from the book Journey for Justice, The Life of Larry Itliong, written by Dr. Dalma Balon with Gayle Romasanta, illustrations by Andre Sabayan. But first, let's get to know a little bit about Larry Itliong. Larry Itliong, 1913 to 1977, was a Filipino immigrant, farm labor organizer, and civil rights leader who led the 1965 Delano grape strike and co-founded the United Farm Workers with Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, and other Filipino and Mexican brothers and sisters. His leadership helped spark the farm workers movement, one of the most important American social justice movements of the 20th century. Larry Itliong immigrated to the United States in 1929 from the Philippines when he was 15 years old, and immediately began working as a farm laborer in the salmon canneries of Alaska. His heart was set on becoming an attorney and seeking justice for the poor. But the poverty he lived through and violent racism he and Filipinos encountered all but barred him from getting the education he initially sought. He never became an attorney, but he became a storied Filipino-American labor leader and organizer, leading labor organizations in Alaska and throughout the West Coast. When Larry left his hometown, San Nicolas, in the province of Pangasinan, Philippines, he boarded the ship the Empress of Asia. All the Filipinos on the ship had dreams of going to school and getting an education, and maybe becoming a lawyer, nurse, and finding a rich future in the United States. The trip took 22 days. When Larry landed in Seattle, Washington, it was gray, drizzly, and cold. One of his uncles lived in Seattle and met him at the pier. "Let's go meet other Pinoys." Pinoys. That's the nickname for Filipinos in America, his uncle said. He lowered his voice. "Do you have any money?" he asked. "I'm out of work and I could use $5 for food and rent." This took Larry by surprise as they walked toward Chinatown in downtown Seattle. As they approached King Street, Larry saw hundreds of Filipinos in stylish suits, hanging out in the sidewalks and talking loudly in many Filipino languages and in English. He heard one young man speaking Ilocano, so he introduced himself. "We're Alascaros, workers in the salmon canneries in Alaska," the young man told him. "We're waiting for the season to start. After the cannery season, we go up and down California, throughout Washington, and even to Montana, harvesting fruits and vegetables." One of the older men showed Larry his rough, calloused hands. We harvest grapes, onions, tomatoes, asparagus, potatoes, peaches, lettuce, celery, and more, he said. The work is so hard and my back always hurts, but I send money home to my family so they can live a better life in the Philippines. Larry walked further down King Street, where he met another Ilocano. I attended the University of Washington and studied to become a lawyer, he said, but I had to quit to earn money. We all work in canneries, restaurants, or as house cleaners or servants. If you have brown skin, you can't get any other kind of job. He told Larry that he and others from his town in the Philippines put together what little money they had to buy food and rent a small apartment. Larry felt like he was punched in the gut. He thought, this is life in America? After 2 weeks in Seattle, Larry heard that a farmer in Montana needed workers to harvest sugar beets. He said goodbye to his uncle and hopped on a train to Montana. There, Larry woke before dawn and worked with a crew of Filipinos who hunched over the land for hours under a relentless sun during the day and in the freezing wind at night. They worked with no breaks, toilets, or clean drinking water, and they slept in old barns and dusty bunkhouses with dirt floors. Larry's back and knees ached, and his sore muscles made him toss and turn at night. He had to wear a wide-brimmed hat, long sleeves, and boots for protection from the sun and dust. He sometimes worked 12 hours or more a day and had no days off. The farmers also used poisonous chemicals called pesticides on the crops to kill the insects that damaged the crops, but the pesticides also hurt the workers. After the season was over, Larry found a job working on the railroad in Montana. One day while he was riding the train, he realized that he missed his stop. With the train going full speed, Larry jumped off, but his right pinky finger got caught in the train door. He lost a lot of blood and stayed in the hospital for 3 months. His fingers were so damaged that the doctor had to amputate or surgically remove 3 fingers on his right hand. After Larry healed, his friends in the United States gave him a new nickname, 7 Fingers. He wrote a letter to his family about the accident, and he looked for a new job. Larry's father wrote back and suggested that he could go to college in Manila and live with an uncle there. Larry wondered what his former classmates would think of him. He left for America with big hopes, only to come home with nothing. Even worse, he would return with 3 fewer fingers. Larry wrote back right away. No, I came here of my own free will, and if I can't lick this problem by myself, then I am nobody, he wrote. Larry returned to Washington, where he got a job as a janitor at the fried lettuce farm for 12 cents an hour. Every day, Larry watched the Filipino workers stoop low and move quickly, row after row, cutting the heads of lettuce from the roots in the earth for 10 cents an hour. On the farm, the white workers received 15 cents an hour for an easier job. They washed and packed lettuce into boxes in a nearby shed, preparing them to be shipped all over the nation. Soon, the white workers demanded a 10-cent raise. When the bosses said no, the white workers went on a strike. A strike is when all workers agree to stop working. Together, they demand a higher wage and better working conditions. If the employer agrees to workers' demands, the strike ends and the workers return to work. The white shed workers asked the Filipinos to join them in the strike and promised the Filipinos that they would not go back to work unless everyone got a raise. The Filipinos agreed, and the next day, more than 500 Filipino workers demanded a 5-cent raise. Until they got it, they refused to work. Larry joined the strike. "Why are you going on a strike? You work inside," the superintendent shouted. Larry responded, "These are my people. If I stay here in the office, I would be a chicken." After 3 weeks of the strike, the employer Fried Lettuce Farm gave the white workers a 10-cent raise, and they returned to work. The Filipinos did not receive a raise. Larry felt angry. "We only asked for 5 cents, he thought. He and the other Filipinos felt betrayed. And even worse, despite their promises to the Filipino workers to stand in unity with them, the shed workers found scabs or replacement workers for the Filipinos who went on strike, and all the Filipinos lost their jobs. Another word for scabs is strikebreaker. If employers have replacement workers, they don't have to agree to the demands of those who are on strike, and then the strike is broken. The experience taught Larry an important lesson. All workers had to be unified in their fight for justice. Larry also went to Alaska to work in the canneries. Many Filipinos worked in the canneries of Alaska. When the summer ended, Larry left Alaska and went to California. He worked all over the West Coast, riding freight trains and catching rides with friends. He canned sardines in San Pedro, harvested lettuce in Salinas, cut and packed asparagus in the San Joaquin Delta near Stockton, and each summer he returned to work in the salmon canneries in Alaska. Larry and thousands of other immigrants and migrant workers who were doing the work of planting and harvesting fruits and vegetables made the growers and cannery owners very wealthy. These fruits and vegetables were sold all over the globe. Their labor transformed California into one of the richest economies in the world. The years went by quickly. He was working so hard to survive that he forgot about college. Through all of this, Larry was learning important lessons. Workers had a right to form a union and to be treated fairly and paid a living wage. In a union, the workers form an organization whose members stand together and agree on demands about their pay and working conditions. This is called collective bargaining. They could be a powerful force when unified. By this time, the nation was in the grip of the Great Depression. Millions of people lost their jobs, homes, and farms and were struggling to survive. Some blamed immigrants, particularly Mexicans and Filipinos, for taking all of the jobs, even though that was not true. As he worked up and down the West Coast, Larry experienced brutal racism, hatred of people because of their skin color. Most cities and towns practiced segregation or separation of people based on skin color. Many Filipinos and Filipinas could only live in areas called Little Manilas, or in Chinatowns. One day, while Larry was walking in downtown Stockton's Little Manila, a vibrant area full of Filipino stores, restaurants, and other businesses, Larry saw a group of white teenagers jump out of a car with baseball bats and call Filipinos terrible, ugly names, like Brown Monkey. They beat up as many Filipinos as they could before driving off. In most American cities, there were areas where Filipinos were not welcome. Larry saw signs that read, "Positively, no Filipinos allowed," and "No dogs and no Filipinos allowed," in front of hotels, restaurants, and stores in Stockton and all over California. He heard stories of Filipino labor camps that had been bombed and the Filipinos who had been beaten. Some had been shot and killed. Larry's heart ached with sadness and anger at so much injustice all around him. Meanwhile, Larry's friend Carlos Bulasan was writing a book about the Filipino experience in the United States. In the book he wrote, "In many ways, it was a crime to be a Filipino in California. Filipinos could not become citizens, nor could they vote, own land, or marry whites. They were being treated like criminals in a land they had once been taught was the greatest country on earth." One day in 1959,
Thank you. And so that's the end of my portion. If you want to watch that or show that to your class or show it to your kids or students, I'll put the link down below and it's free. Feel free to forward for those who do not have access or cannot get the book. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Gayle, for sharing. I read that book with my daughter a few years ago when it first came out, and her grandfather was an Alaskero as well as in the Central Valley farming as well. And so I don't know if she retained any of that information. The book is on the shelf, and maybe she'll go back and but at any rate, for Vanessa, who suggested earlier, couldn't find many books, or for a lot of us who couldn't find many books, you and Robin both providing access to our kids. So thank you very much. Justine Villanueva is our next author to this evening. She traces her ancestral roots to the Bukidnon. It's been a while since I said that. Bukidnon tribe of Kalasungay. Bukidnon, where she was raised until she emigrated to the US, was when she was 17 years old. She's the third child of Julieta Lee and Ernesto Villanueva, fifth child of Filimon Villanueva and Felipa Okit Apoong, a descendant of Apu Mansaliwa. Is that correct? Did I get it right? Mansaliwa. Please do it justice if I didn't. She now lives in the Patwin Wintun Yocha Dehe territory in Davis, California, with her husband and two sons. Justine's creative work focuses on decolonization, social justice, and reconnecting with the living earth. She writes children's books and is a founder of Sawaga River Press, a nonprofit press that publishes children's books for featuring Filipino children in the diaspora. She also runs her own law and real estate office and loves to dance. Justine, thank you.
Thank you, Freedom. Thank you so much for inviting me here tonight. I'm humbled and grateful to be here. And I'm very motivated by what I've been hearing from Gayle and Robin. So I'm happy to add what I can to the conversation. Let's see. I've prepared what I have for tonight with Jack and Agu in mind. So I'll just add a few more things about the other books towards the end. But I wanted to talk about this book because this book is really near and dear to my heart. It came out in 2019, right before the pandemic started. But the work for it took about 2 years, from editing to illustrating and crowdfunding, and all that stuff took about 2 years. But really the seed for the story really happened even way before 2017. This story was inspired by an experience that I had with my kids, my eldest kid, who came to me and said that he wanted to be Harry Potter for Halloween, but he didn't think he could be a good Harry Potter. And when I asked him why, he said it was because his skin was not gray. That's how he articulated the whiteness of the skin. His skin is not gray. It's not the right color. And when he said that to me, I was so heartbroken because he knew everything about Harry Potter. I mean, he loved Harry Potter. And then that reminded me of another story that a friend of mine also told me a year or so prior to when this happened. So probably around 2015 or so. She told me that when her kids were younger, she bought a bunch of books in the Philippines to give to him. He was born and raised here, so he's never seen a book that featured Filipino or even brown kids on the pages. And so when he saw the characters, he thought that the characters were dirty. He thought that the brown skin was dirty. And so he went on a mission and got his eraser and tried to erase the dirt that he saw. And when she told me that story, I was so heartbroken. So those two stories kind of melded together and became the inspiration for now for this story. And I bring that up because it's quite such a process from the seed of the story to when the book actually came out. But I actually wanted to add that even before those stories came to me, I was actually also ready to hear these stories. The ground was fertile, so to speak. My brain was ready for these kinds of stories. And a big part of it was because I was deep in my journey to personally decolonize. Now, I didn't know that was what it was called back then. I wasn't able to articulate that I was decolonizing, but that was what I was doing. I was deep in the process of learning about the spirit of Kapwa and recognizing our interconnectedness and our kinship, not just with people, but everything, all of creation. So the spirit of Kapwa was really in my brain, and it is one of the main themes of the book, the Jack and Agu book. And I also was very much shaped by my becoming a mom. When I became a mom back in my eldest is now 13, so he was born in 2008. I really all of a sudden saw myself as part of this lineage. I suddenly realized that, I have ancestors, which I never thought of before, and that, I will be an ancestor at some point, and that I have kids who I have some sort of responsibility to pass on what I have, received from my ancestors. And so this pushed me into this mind frame of needing to go back to reclaim my ancestry, my indigenous roots, and that made me go back and rekindle my relationships with my family and my friends in Bukidnon, which was where I was born and raised in. And so it also catapulted me into this journey of like learning the languages, learning Binukid, which was my grandmother's tongue, but was not passed on to me because of colonization. It made me really motivated to write books in Bisaya and Cebuano, which is my first language, so that I could pass it on to my kids. And if you think that there are not a lot of children's books that feature Filipino kids that are in our language, and sometimes when we say that we only mean Tagalog, then there's really even like, I don't even know how many books there are in Bisaya, let alone Binukid, which is the indigenous language of Bukidnon. So there's very, very, very few, especially here in the diaspora. Now, of course, if you go to the Philippines, it's a different story. But it was really, that's what really drove me into publishing and writing. And it still is the driving force now as I continue with what I'm doing. And also this kind of echoing what Robin said about collaboration and the publishing being an endeavor, a thing that we do for the community, and it's about the community, and it is by the community. And it's so beautiful if I think of it like that, because it's so whole, it feels whole. And I think that for me, doing it this way, writing specifically about Filipino American kids, and then engaging with Filipino groups in the community to get this book published, and then engaging with Filipino creatives, Filipino American artists. It just feels like this, it just feels right, at least for me. So I continue to do that, and I've created collaborations with the Babaylan Center for Babaylan Studies, which is also a big part of my personal decolonization journey. The Bulasan Center for Filipino Studies here at UC Davis with Dr. Robin Rodriguez, and then also the Bukidnon Studies Center in Bukidnon, who have been pivotal in vetting everything that is Bukidnon related in my book, and translating everything so that it's accurate and respectful of the representation of the culture. And so many lessons along the way. I have so much more to say. I don't know if I have more time, but I will read a couple of sections in the book. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I will. Give me a second to share. Only host who can share. Can I share? It's fine if I can't. I can just switch to.
You should be able to, Justine.
Okay. So I'm going to share. Eventually, who can say when someone else is sharing? All participants. It doesn't look like I can.
You should just go ahead and click on share screen on the green part, not on the carrot.
Oh, I see. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to quickly share. So this is our book, Jack and Aguio. I forgot to say it has 4 languages. It's in Filipino or Tagalog, Bisaya, Cebuano, and Binukid, and of course English. And then it also features Baybayin as well, which is what you see here in the title. So just a very quick summary, because I'm not going to read it. This is about a little boy who likes to read, and he loves to imagine himself doing the things that he reads about, like becoming a wizard and going off in the high seas and being a pirate and taming dragons. And then one day he notices that he doesn't look like the characters that he reads about, and makes him sad, because he thought that maybe it meant he could not be a wizard or, a pirate or whatever else that is. And it made him really sad until he thought of a brilliant idea. So this is a section that I want to read right here. So I'll start right here. Jack was sad for a long time until he thought of a brilliant idea. Jack took out his favorite crayon, the brown crayon. Da, da, da. Brown like the champurrado, the chocolate rice porridge that his lolo, his grandpa, often made him for breakfast. Brown like the mud he loved to roll in when it rained. Brown like his mama's skin. So I read that part because for me it's my love letter to brownness and my brown pride moment right here. And then I'm also going to read, okay, so I'll just very quickly say, so he discovers a brown crayon. He employs his older brother, his kuya, to color all the books from the library brown. And of course, he gets in trouble. Librarian calls the mama. And so the mama gives him a big hug. And then that night tells him the story. And this is what I'm going to read. So that night, Jack's mama tucked him into bed and told him his story. Once there was a child named Agyo, she said. His lola, his grandma, gave him an anting-anting to wear around his neck to protect him from harm. He grew up to lead the fight against the invaders of his homeland. He had black hair and brown skin and looked very much like you. And as Jack's mama told the adventures of Agyo, Jack's ears perked up, his eyes grew wide, and he imagined he was with a brave Agyo. Frolicking with the Shokoy and Sirena, the spirit keepers of the Pulangi River. Seeking permission from the Diwata, guardians of the forest, to catch wild boar for the villagers to eat. Offering flowers and herbs to the Babaylan healer. And helping his lolo, lola, mama, papa, kuya, family, and fellow kapwa ride the golden flying salimbal to everlasting freedom. Jack slept with a smile on his face. And I read that part because this kind of ties into what I was saying about how in my personal decolonizing journey, I've come to appreciate the stories that my lola has told me, but not much. And it's made me go back and research it more for the purpose of being able to tell it, but tell it in a way that is not appropriate, but like that is, I don't know what the word is, that will be interesting to the children, especially those who are in the diaspora. And again, this is the kapwa is here. That's kapwa Talimbal. And it again goes into the idea of our interconnectedness, our being able to relate to each other is what keeps us safe and protects us from harm. I'm sorry, I didn't keep track of my time, so I don't know how much time I have. I'll just finish up the story so you're not hanging, you're not left hanging. So then the mama tells him the story, and the next morning he goes back to the librarian. He promises to pay, and then the librarian says she will help him and all the other children who want to see themselves on the books that they read. And then from then on, he just brought his crayons and papers with him, and he loved to draw all the characters from his mama's stories, especially Agyo, who looked very much like him. And then here are the translations, all three translations, if anybody's interested in seeing them. And here we have contributors, and I will just highlight this because Gayle mentioned the whole thing about crowdfunding. For this book, we did have over 200 crowdfunders, and that really is part of what I'm really very grateful about, because it really is a community funded, community engaged project. So not just the people who are involved in the production, but also the people who just want to see this out there and are wanting to financially support it. Oh, and Lenore Montigao is the illustrator. There she is. Awesome. I will stop share right there, and let's see, I guess I have, oh. I'm gonna backtrack really quickly. That section that I read, and I'm gonna end with this, the one where the mama reads or tells the story to Jack about Aguirre. I read that because I wanted to emphasize, for me, the importance of storytelling, especially oral storytelling, and how it has the power to heal our wounds, or the harms that have been caused to us by colonization, especially for us here in the diaspora who are feeling the effects of colonization, our separation from our homeland. That was my whole push for storytelling, especially oral storytelling, and just using it as a way for us to heal from all that. I will stop right there. I think I've taken enough time. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Justine. Thank you so much. Wow, just thinking about as you read through that, and just the age appropriateness and the culturally relevant material for the younger kids. Again, just wishing that I had that. I also really appreciate the framing of us in the context of the diaspora. I think oftentimes those of us who are in the diaspora have some sort of disconnect, or oftentimes maybe a degree of shame because we are in the diaspora. But I mean, we are a product of this history, and so I really appreciate that. Someone who is continuing the work in the diaspora as well, in the cultural sense. Conrad Benedicto is a teacher, author, and Kulintang musician who studied with Kulintang master artist Danongan Kalundayan from 1997 until his passing in 2016. Conrad was Danongan Kalundayan's apprentice through the Alliance for California Traditional Arts apprenticeship program in 2007 and again in 2013. In 2018, Conrad received an individual artist grant from the San Francisco Arts Commission to compose original Kulintang music for his project, Kulintang Dialect. And Cool Arts, the premier presenter of tribal and contemporary Filipino arts, published Conrad's debut novel, Musalaya's Gift, in 2021. I also had the privilege to serve Mr. Benedicto at Balboa High School. So good to have you. Thank you, Mr. B.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me. Thank you to Robin, Gayle, and Justine. Those were very inspiring stories and books. I'm going to buy all of them. So yeah, my book is Musalaya's Gift. And basically, this book comes out of three things that have been very important and inspiring in my life for a long time. And that is fantasy stories, both the sort of Western Harry Potter side, which I have also been very much obsessed with all my life, but also have felt not a part of, and sort of like a stranger to, even as I enjoyed being in the story and imagining myself in it. But also in terms of fantasy, the stories that I grew up with, the folk stories and myths that both fascinated and terrified me as a child growing up in the Philippines. So that's one. And the other one is what you see behind me, the music of Kulintang, which I've been studying for more than 20 years. That was this fantastic gift that was given to our Filipino American community by Danongan Kalanduyan. Anybody who plays Kulintang probably learned a song that he has gifted to our community. And finally, the third is our people's ongoing struggle against colonialism and for freedom and equality, both in the Philippines and here in the United States. So really those are the three things that kind of inspire this book. So it's a fantasy novel, but it's also an allegory for colonialism and resistance to colonialism. And hopefully it's an exciting, exciting story that keeps readers on the edge of their seats. And so I'll just read a couple of passages that I hope kind of like reflect those three things that I've kind of outlined. The first passage is featuring one of my favorite characters in the book, who is a crocodile, a very odd crocodile who kind of like appears in the mythology, but also in the real sort of ongoing plot of the book. And so I'll just read that now. Dabiana was odd for a crocodile, and it wasn't just her size or longer than average legs. She was only 170 years old, but already she was as big as all the old timers in the river. In those days, she was still mostly a predator, although she already had a taste for more exotic fare and already carried that fabled monkey across the river on her back. She hadn't yet swum throughout the entire archipelago for 1,000 years, quietly listening below bridges, prowling into darkened halls and palaces, exploring caves and lakes, mapping river systems, sniffing at mysterious mounds in the woods, climbing rugged peaks, and eating all manner of folk and beast, while also learning of their ways and their secrets. She had not yet become extraordinary or earned her other names. But, quote, Big Fatty, as she was called, was already kooky enough to spy Amal Karandang, walking by the river to decide to see for herself if stringy old men really did cause one to have indigestion. Dabiana wiggled her body side to side and silently glided toward the riverbank, propelled by her enormously thick tail. Other than the ripples that spread out from the ridges on her back, only Dabiana's bright emerald eyes were visible on the surface of the water. Amal, whose eyes had already begun to go bad, did not notice her presence despite nervously checking the river every now and then. Cleverly choosing her moment, the crocodile crawled up the riverbank with but the tiniest splash and quickly snuck up behind the old man. Without a second thought, she lunged. Her mighty jaws, roomy, jagged, and immaculate, Dabiana detested having odd bits of flesh from previous meals lodged uncomfortably between her teeth, opened wide and snapped shut a split second later. Clang! Amal Karandang's kulintang gongs fell through a huge gash in his rucksack and banged against each other as they hit the ground. Clang, clang, clang! Dabiana shook her head. She had missed. At the last instant, her rear left foot slipped on the muddy bank, causing her to fall slightly short of her goal. Instead of the old man, she had bitten down on his rucksack, and it had contained something hard and metallic that now made her front teeth ache and her ears ring with noise. Amal, who had pitched forward onto the trail, raised himself up on his knees and looked back. There, just beyond the scattered kulintang gongs, the most monstrous looking crocodile he had ever seen swished its giant tail like an angry pussycat. Its green eyes were the size of guavas, and its teeth ran along its jaws like rows of sharpened spears. Its body was thicker than a full-grown carabao and twice as long. The fearsome reptile looked very annoyed, but slightly confused. Amal could think of only one thing to do in order to save his life. In a flash, he gathered and arranged his kulintang gongs in front of him. Before the crocodile could blink, he began to play a slow and soothing melody, the kind he liked to hear before going to bed. He played as skillfully as he could, with plenty of artful and elaborate flourishes designed to mollify the beast. After a few long and harrowing minutes of music, he noticed or imagined in his desperation that the monster's annoyed frown had turned into a toothy grin. Its jaws were no longer at the ready, and in fact, its head had slowly come down to rest on the sparse line of grass in the middle of the Riverside Trail. By the time Amal had finished the third song, the crocodile was fast asleep. Amal almost fainted from relief when he realized that his desperate ploy had worked. The rest of the story, they become friends and they go on an adventure. But that's a myth, one of the central myths in the kind of like hold up the whole story, the whole arc of the story. Yeah, it's one of my favorite characters. I don't think I have time to read another excerpt, so I think I'll stop there and hope you enjoyed it.
Amazing. Thank you, Mr. Benedicto. Conrad, for your contributions and to the cultural landscape and fabric of our community in the diaspora, continuing that legacy of Dan Nongan as your master teacher, and the legacy of his spirit.
Thank you.
El Presidente. Oh no, past Presidente. Should I?
Yes, past presidents.
Past President.
I've definitely passed on the torch, but I'd love for our authors to answer any questions that any of our attendees might have. So I've asked folks to place any questions they have for the authors in the chat. And let's see if there's any there that we can look to. If you don't get a chance to put questions in the chat, feel free to unmute and go ahead and provide voice to your question. And perhaps while we're waiting for questions, could the authors share what is your recommendation for writing stories? If someone wanted to follow in all of your footsteps and write more amazing stories about ourselves, our history, our community, what's some advice you could give?
I'll say something. I think one of the most important things I learned writing this book is that when you write, a lot of it is for yourself, and you have to figure out what's for the audience and what was for you to just figure out what you needed to write. So a lot of my process involved cutting things, because that was just me trying to imagine things in my head to make the story come alive in my head that would have become too much exposition for the audience. And you have to sort of trust that the audience is imagining things, and that you just give them like a little bit and then they imagine the rest. Because if you try to give them everything, that's too much. So.
Thank you, Conrad. Gayle, Robin, Justine, want to jump in?
I would say you just need to write it. Understand that the first draft is the vomit draft. I always call it the vomit draft. It's not going to be any good at all. And don't ever feel bad about that or feel discouraged. Maybe your first draft is great, but I know mine are, and many writers, the first draft is just trying to get something on paper. So don't stop. I think for many years, many people think that they can't do it, or they don't make time for it, or they think it's out of their reality, but you really can. You just have to do it. You really just do it and put it out there, and it comes.
I'd have to agree with that too, Gail. I think the biggest lesson for me out of all this is to just have faith in my stories, because that was the biggest block for me. I have always felt like, oh, my stories are not good enough, or like, who's going to be interested in reading about a story about, I don't know, whatever the story is about, because you have this extra baggage of feeling like, oh, I'm not a writer, I don't have an MFA, I don't have anything, right? I'm just writing about lived experience, and that doesn't count as much. But I think that for me was the biggest hurdle that I had to go past. And then once I made the first jump, I'm like, oh, this I can do this. So it got easier. But I tell you, that was a very big hurdle for me.
And I can add a little bit. I think for me, my advice would be to create your story, your art with community, because I wouldn't be able to do it by myself. And so find mentors, folks who've written books before, and reach out to them. Find mentors, work with other artists and writers, and also want to highlight something I think a few of us said is crowdfunding. That's okay. It's okay to ask for help. And that was very, very helpful.
Yes, I think that is it, right? There's so many of us that want to support this work because we didn't have these stories ourselves, growing up. So I for one, as a parent of 4 grown-ups, they're all adults now, but would have appreciated all of these books even when they were growing up. So a question was, how are these works of arts being shared to the world? Please, authors, place your information in the chat as far as where they can purchase these books. Of course, we want to support our authors themselves, as well as our local Filipino-owned bookstores. And there's a question from Marielle. Did any of you face any challenges with carrying the weight of these stories?
For the Journey for Justice, that one was a special one just because his story was never published before, and Don was supposed to write the adult version or the longer version for college age students, and that was always the plan, and we had lost her. We lost her on the day that we finished the book. We lost her on the day that we actually received the book from the printer, and I had actually mailed out all the edits. And so that's Dr. Don Mavalan, by the way. And so I think some of the challenges are that you move forward no matter what. I think this is a good thing. It wasn't a good thing that we lost her, but when Dawn and I would joke, we were like, we're writing a movement, and we would laugh, and we were just joking. We never once thought that we could ever have a book tour, or we never once thought, oh, I think I'm going to share this book in New York. Our biggest thing was we're going to go to San Francisco, and then we're going to go to Delano and do a book launch, which actually were wonderful goals. And I'm so happy that we were able to do that. But once we lost Dawn, I think me and many folks who helped me, most especially Fonds National, and some other community members and community organizations like PEP and Little Manila, we all knew how important it was, and that we lost one of our major storytellers and historians in our community. And we all came together and did a national book tour, and we made that happen. And I did so much press that I've never, ever done in my whole life. I spoke in front of I did everything that I'd never done before. On a national level scale. And I think that goes to show that you really don't know how far you can go until you are pushed, and the importance of the reality of that our stories will never be told unless you actually take that jump off the cliff, with or without the people that you thought that were going to come with you. I think that is probably the biggest challenge, is to get over what many of us said, here, you come together as a community, and you must, no matter what, just make that reality for you and your community, because there is absolutely no one wanting to do it for you in the mainstream. That is for sure. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge, in which I love that all of us crowdfunded here, because in marginalized communities like ours, that there's no other way. no one would ever put the money, no one would ever put $30,000 down to publish a book. And it's expensive to do that. It can be $10,000 to $30,000. For Journey for Justice, it was $30,000. So no one would do that for us. So I'm so grateful for our community. And that is really the challenge for our community and for us to continue, despite how rigorous and despite how challenging and despite how hard it is to do this. But when we're come together, it actually makes it that much easier. But the importance is there regardless if there's anyone going to do it or not.
Thanks, Gail. Would anyone else like to add on?
I'll add on a little bit to that and then also bring up another thing. The whole thing with the crowdfunding, it's such a mindset shift that we have to have. It's when I started doing it, it was mainly friends and family, because they'll support me no matter what I do. But I've come to just this realization that really, like, even if I'm not your friend or your family member, like, my role in this whole thing is to create the books, and your role is to fund these books because you want these books, right? And for some people, like, some people do think like that, but I think like that we need to also kind of push for that kind of mentality. Like, in a way, it is your responsibility to fund these books because you benefit from it as well. It's not like we don't get rich out of making these books. I wish we did. We don't have to do 5 million other things. That's all we do. But, anyway, so I just adding that to what Gail has said. But for us, our main, at least for this book, the main challenge was the fear of appropriating, because you can't see. Well, anyway, I'm bringing in, a story that is culled from the epic Ulaging, that's, from the Bukidnon tribe. And there are questions of like, well, who are you to be able to tell these stories? Like, what's your relationship to this group that you're telling stories about? And a big part of it, which was why we had to collaborate, was just really like forming relationships, and so that it's not an extractive process. So you're not just going in there and telling stories of people or communities that you don't have any relationship to. And that was for us the biggest thing that we had to work on. And hopefully we did it right. And so anyway, I wanted to put that out there.
I'll say a little. For me, the big thing was because Cooling Tongue is featured so centrally in the book. I actually started writing this when I graduated from college a long, long time ago. But I felt like I couldn't actually write this story because I had to learn the music first. And it wasn't until I'd learned, for 2 decades, that I felt like I could do it justice as a part of a story, which sort of speaks to what you were saying, Justine, about, not being extractive and making sure you honor your audience and you honor where these stories are coming from. Alleluia Panes, who was one of the editors of the book, along with my wife Catherine, who has read it a million times. She was really good in terms of making sure that it was as respectful as possible to the audience for which it was written, which is us. And even things like, using the word hut to describe where we live. She was like, why are you using the word hut? And I was like, you're right. That erases, architecture and, just a whole history of forms in terms of the way we've constructed our dwellings. And so we changed all the huts to tahanan. Like, why not tahanan? Tahanan means house, home. And that's so much that not only is that a more respectful word, it is also laden with history and meaning that when a person reads it in a sentence, it's so much richer. The experience of reading that is so much richer than reading the word hut. So things like that. And that's why, again, it's also important to have collaboration, people that, that look at your work and help you make it as good as it can be. So.
Thank you. Robin?
I think for me, the biggest challenge was like writing this during the pandemic, and especially I was writing it the year I was graduating, so it was hard to manage everything. But I feel like it was a little difficult staying like motivated and inspired to write while everything in the world was happening. And especially bringing, like I said, collaborative process. So being able to like bring folks in and gather people together to create this while folks are focusing on surviving, that was honestly very difficult. But something I learned is like, it's okay to like slow down and make sure that you are okay before you push yourself to do anything. So prioritizing just wellness right now, because it's very difficult to do so in this pandemic. I think another thing that was very challenging was like just being mindful of the words that I wanted to use in this book, especially for Andres Bonifacio, when we have like other Pinays coming in like Tandang Sora and his wife, Gregoria de Jesus. I told my dad, I remember having conversations with my dad, like, I want to make sure that they aren't the side characters, that they're not an accessory to Bonifacio, that they are their own powerful leader. And so it took me a very long time, honestly, to really think about the ways that I wanted to write about these Pinays. Again, not like an accessory, not like a background character. Like they are just as powerful, and Bonifacio wouldn't be him if it weren't for these women in the first place. And so just that phrasing, it took me a lot of time to figure that out. And again, during this pandemic, it was like, oh, I'm not feeling very motivated. But in time, I got it. So that was my challenge.
Thank you so much. We have a request, so hopefully we all can stay on for just a few more minutes. Manang Elena, did you want to say something? You wanted to give voice to a comment.
Yes.
You had a comment.
Thank you. This is Elena Mangajas. I think tonight I represent the Filipino American National Historical Society Museum in Stockton, and I volunteer there as a docent, and I have been busy asserting the reading of stories for young people as part of our programming, as part of our events that would actually bring in the adults along with their children. Because what good is a museum if there are no children or young people partaking in what is there to see? So one of the programming ideas that I have been asserting, just because I grew up on the Ibon Adarna and Lola Basyang community in the Philippines. And so I extensively read all those materials, and I also read them to my children. And a few years back, the PAWA group, the Filipino American Writers Group based in San Francisco, they also brought in these children's books as well as the offering that they had, selling them to the public who attended their big event. So there was a market for it. A lot of people were wanting to read the Ibon Adarnas and the Lola Basyang story. So I said, what a great idea to introduce it to young people as a bridge for them to be reading your books, to be reading about Larry Leong, to be reading Robin's book or Justine's book. Some of them are in Tagalog, some of them are translated already. But since the parents know about this, it should begin from them. And whatever they're very familiar with, which is that of what they grew up in, they can introduce this to their children. And then how about if we have a stock of all your books, and congratulations, you actually are moving the needle on the resources that will be available for the next generation of young Filipinos in America, in the diaspora. So there is effort, and I thank you all also for writing your books, because you inspire others, and maybe some of those stories could be translated. There is a rich resource of folktales and myths and proverbs and epics that are available in the Philippines that could actually be translated. So that might give other ideas. You don't need to reinvent the wheel, just put them in English, or spin them if need be, because we have such a rich source of stories that was part of our Filipino culture back in the Philippines. And I won't be talking this way if I did not gain a lot of interest in all those stories. Indigenous people, heroes, everything. So a little bit of Justine, a little bit of Robin, and our reality, a little bit of Gayle, and Conrad. Fascinating story on what do you call this? Nakakatakot. It has the element of it brings out the element of fear for young people. You got it all, folks. Congratulations. I'm loving it. Thank you for making time for me, Tracy.
Thank you,
Contact
Mama.
me.
Well, with that, it's true. We come from so much richness, so much history, right? This amazing culture that we belong to. And again, as you know, as a fellow educator, putting your books, putting all of these resources in the hands of our students, in the hands of our families, in homes, on bookshelves, is so important. So I am just so grateful that all of you were able to join us in our virtual story hour. And I appreciate everyone that has attended tonight for choosing to be with us on a Wednesday evening and bringing your kiddos to hear the stories. I hope you go grab those books, all of them, and read them over and over and over again. And if you have any questions, or you want to collaborate, or you need some collaborators, here is the community right here. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. I wish you all a wonderful evening, and please take care of yourselves. Good night.